Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We're going to be talking about something kind of different today. We're going beyond just your basic happy or sad and looking at all those ways we can express not for positive feelings in English.
Yeah, like all those subtle shades of sadness and stress and even anger. The kind of vocabulary that can help you sound like a natural.
Totally. And we've got a super interesting source for this one, this English learning podcast dialogue between Marco and Catherine. They use so many real world examples, it's like we're listening in on a chat between friends.
Exactly. It's a really great way to learn how these words and phrases are used in everyday conversations.
All right, so let's start with something we can probably all relate to. Feeling a bit down.
Good place to start. Down is a really versatile word in English. It can mean like a direction, like going down the stairs, but it can also describe this emotional state, kind of low energy, maybe a little blue.
Yeah, it's definitely softer than just saying sad, isn't it? Like if someone asks how you are, you might say, I'm feeling a bit down today, rather than I'm sad.
You're right. There's a difference. Down suggests it's temporary, like a dip in your mood. Sadness can imply something deeper.
And speaking of feeling blue, Marco actually uses that expression in the dialogue. Do you think most English learners know where that phrase comes from?
It's pretty interesting, actually. Some people think it comes from 18th century England. When a captain of a ship died, they would fly blue flags. It was like a symbol of mourning.
Wow, so that's how the color blue got linked to feeling sad, but the blues is also a type of music, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Blues music often talks about things like sadness and hardship, but there's this element of resilience, too, finding hope and all that.
It's like the music is a way to process those difficult emotions.
Exactly.
So Marco also uses the word grouchy in the dialogue. Would you say that's a stronger emotion than just feeling down?
Oh, yeah, grouchy is definitely more on the irritable side. Someone who's grumpy,
Yeah.
easy to annoy, maybe a bit unfriendly, like they woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
He gives that great example of Oscar the Grouch from Sesame Street, like the
Yeah.
perfect image of grouchy.
That's a good one.
Now let's move on from grouchy to full-blown stress. There's a difference between just saying stressed and stressed out.
Oh, definitely. Stressed out is like the amplified version. Like you are at your wit's end,
Oh.
completely overwhelmed.
And we hear it all the time. I mean, who hasn't felt stressed out at some point?
It's a pretty universal feeling. And Catherine in the podcast, she is a great example of juggling homework, softball practice, helping with dinner.
Oh, I can relate to Catherine for sure.
Yeah.
And that brings us to nerve-wracking, which is a whole other level of stress.
Ah, nerve-wracking is like when something causes you intense anxiety. Like your nerves are being stretched to their limit, like waiting for exam results or having to give a presentation to a huge crowd.
That feeling of anticipation, right? Like something big is about to happen,
Yeah.
and you don't know if you're ready for it.
And in the dialogue, they give so many good examples. Demanding jobs, like being a doctor, or an experience like skydiving, even watching a close soccer match.
Okay, so we've got stressed out and nerve-wracking, both connected to anxiety. So how is on edge different?
On edge is more like this heightened state of irritability,
Hmm.
like you're one tiny step away from completely losing it.
Yeah.
Just easily agitated. Even the smallest things can set you off.
Like in the podcast, they talk about someone who just quit smoking being especially on edge.
Nicotine withdrawal can make you super irritable.
So it's like a physical state and an emotional state.
Exactly. Like you're wired and you just can't relax, like you're always waiting for something bad to happen.
And sometimes all that builds up until you just, you lose it, lose your temper.
Yeah, that moment when frustration just becomes anger and you react in a way that you might regret later.
And they give some relatable examples in the dialogue of what can cause this, right?
Yeah. Marco talks about getting mad about a messy room,
Yeah.
and Catherine hates repetitive noises.
So interesting how those little everyday things can push our buttons like that.
Everyone has their own triggers.
Exactly. And Marco uses this great phrase for that feeling, grinds my gears.
Oh, that's a good one. Such a descriptive idiom for that intense irritation,
Yeah.
like something is constantly getting on your nerves.
Like you can just hear the gears grinding.
And it's amazing how these idioms can say so much more than just a literal meaning.
Right. But sometimes, instead of getting angry and letting things grind your gears, you just want to shut down
No.
for everything. Like if someone is bugging you and you just want to brush them off.
Brushing someone off is like dismissing them, often in a subtle way, like making an excuse to get out of doing something or even just walking away while they're talking.
So it's a way to create distance, maybe because you're annoyed or just need a break from the situation.
Yeah, but it might not be the most polite way to do it.
True, but sometimes you need to protect yourself. But let's go to something a little more positive, like cheering someone up.
Oh, yeah. Cheer up is a nice expression, like you're trying to make someone feel better, lift their
Like
spirits.
you're offering support and reminding them that things will get better.
And everyone has their own ways to cheer themselves up, right?
In the podcast, Marco talks about going out for drinks and popcorn. Catherine likes to go shopping.
Oh, interesting. Maybe those choices reflect their personalities.
Good point. And then there's Marco's method, which is kind of unique. Alphabetizing his books when he's stressed.
That's really interesting. Sounds like he finds comfort in things being organized.
Shows how different we all are, right? What cheers you up when you're feeling down?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's a few things. Spending time in nature, listening to music, talking to people I care about.
All good ways to boost your mood, for sure. Now there's one last expression I want to talk about. You are something else.
Oh, this one is a tricky one. It can be positive or negative.
It's like a chameleon phrase.
So for example, imagine a friend tells you about something amazing they did. You might say, wow, you are something else. Like you're impressed and a little bit in disbelief.
But it could also be negative.
Well, yeah. Like if someone betrays you, you might say, you are something else. But you would say it sarcastically to show your disapproval.
So it's all in the delivery.
The tone of voice, the body language, it all matters.
It's like a secret code we need to figure out.
That's what makes learning a language so interesting.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive into negative emotions. We've gone from feeling down to feeling stressed out, explored idioms like grinding my gears and brushing someone off, and even looked at a phrase like, you are something else.
It's fascinating how these phrases can reflect our culture and values.
Yeah, language is so much more than just a bunch of rules. It's a window into the human experience.
And as you keep learning and exploring, you'll discover all sorts of things about how powerful language can be.
But before we get too philosophical, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far.
We've talked about feeling down and stressed out, but what about those times when, those feelings make us react in a way that's maybe not so constructive?
Oh, you mean like when you snap at someone?
Yeah.
Or say something you wish you could take back?
Yeah. Remember we talked about losing your temper? How it can come from those everyday annoyances that just push our buttons?
Like Marco's messy room or Catherine being sensitive to noises.
Those little things that take us from mildly irritated to ready to explode.
And it's so interesting how those triggers tell us about a person, like their personality and what they're sensitive to.
Oh, totally. Like someone who hates a messy room probably values being organized and in control. And someone bothered by noise is sensitive to that kind of sensory input.
It's like those triggers are clues to what we need and what's important to us.
Exactly. And if you know your triggers, you can maybe manage how you react better. You can even communicate your needs better,
So instead of yelling because someone left dishes in the sink, you could say like, hey, I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. Do you mind helping me tidy up?
Right. It's like going from reacting to a situation to being more proactive and talking about it.
Which brings us back to Catherine's method for cheering herself up. Retail therapy.
Ah, the classic mood booster. I wonder what it is about it that works. Is it buying new things or the distraction or just treating yourself?
Maybe all of the above. And it goes back to what we were saying about how everyone copes differently with negative emotions.
Some people exercise or do something creative or even just need some time alone.
It's wild that even something as simple as alphabetizing your books, like Marco does, can be self-care.
I think it shows how rituals and routines can be calming for us, especially when things feel chaotic.
Like creating order on the outside to find peace on the inside.
Totally. And speaking of order, remember how we talked about how there are different levels of intensity when we express negative emotions?
Like how feeling down is softer than feeling sad, or stressed out is more intense than just stressed.
Yeah, that nuance is so important for communicating properly in English.
You have to choose the right words to say exactly how you feel.
And to understand what other people are trying to tell you.
So paying attention to those little differences can really make you a better communicator.
Okay, so now let's switch gears a bit and talk about those times when we don't even want to deal with negative emotions at all.
You mean like when we just want to brush someone off and pretend there's no problem?
Exactly. Sometimes we need to create some space to protect ourselves. Or maybe we're not ready to deal with something yet.
And brushing someone off can be a way to do that, even if it's not always the nicest way.
You have to think about how your actions affect other people, even when you're feeling overwhelmed.
But sometimes a little space is what you need to calm down and think clearly.
For sure. And you can create distance without being rude.
Yeah.
Like politely saying you need to leave the conversation, or just saying, I need a minute to think.
Those are good alternatives. It shows that even when things are tough emotionally, you can still communicate in a good way.
Okay, so let's talk about something that comes up a lot with negative emotions. Cultural differences.
Oh, right. What might be totally fine to say in one culture could be really offensive in another one.
Exactly. And this is something English learners really need to know so they don't have misunderstandings.
So it's not just about learning the vocabulary, you have to understand the culture where those words are used.
Which brings us back to a question we asked earlier. How do you say these negative emotions in your own language? Are there any special words or phrases that English doesn't quite have?
That's a great question for our listeners to think about. It's amazing how different languages have different ways of describing human emotions.
And those differences can sometimes tell you about a culture's values and history. Like some languages might have many words for sadness that all have slightly different meanings, and other languages might use metaphors or idioms from their culture.
Like how having the blues is linked to those blue flags on ships back in the 1700s. It's like history is right there in the language.
Right? Language is so much more than just a way to talk to each other. It shows us who we are, where we came from, and how we see the world.
And that's what makes learning a language so awesome. You're not just memorizing words, you're learning about different cultures and people.
It's about appreciating how differently we all express ourselves.
Something that struck me about the podcast was how open Marco and Catherine were about their feelings.
Yeah. It was great to hear them talk about those negative emotions without feeling ashamed.
Like it's okay to not be happy all the time.
That's a really important message,
Yeah.
especially because we're often told to be positive.
Yeah, it's like we're supposed to hide those bad feelings and pretend everything's fine.
But hiding those feelings isn't good for us.
Totally. Just talking about those negative emotions can be a huge relief.
It's like letting out a big sigh.
And it can help you connect with people because you realize you're not the only one who feels that way.
It's like saying, hey, I'm human too. I get stressed and I get sad and I lose my temper sometimes.
It's like accepting that we're not perfect. We all have those difficult moments.
Because let's face it, nobody is happy all the time. Life is full of challenges, and it's normal to have negative feelings.
It's about figuring out how to deal with those feelings and how to keep going.
Sometimes it's enough to just acknowledge them and not judge yourself.
Because they are a part of being human. You can't have the good without the bad.
And those bad times might even make us appreciate the good times even more.
It's like they say, you can't have a rainbow without a little rain.
Well, listeners, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've learned words for negative emotions, talked about cultural differences, and how important it is to acknowledge those feelings.
One of the biggest things I think is how language is a really powerful tool, not just for talking to each other, but also for understanding ourselves.
By learning how language affects our emotions and how our emotions affect language, we can learn more about ourselves and the world around us.
And as you keep learning English, remember that those difficult emotions are part of who we are. It's weird, but talking about all these negative words and phrases has actually made me feel more positive.
Oh, really? How come?
Because I realize that everyone feels these things. Sadness and stress and anger, it's all part of being human.
Yeah. When we can name those emotions, they lose their power over us.
It's like there was this scary thing hiding in the dark, and now we turn on the light, and it's not so scary anymore.
And when you can talk about it,
Yeah.
honestly, it can help you connect with other people.
It's like they say, a problem shared is a problem halved. Even if talking doesn't make the problem go away, it helps you feel less alone.
That feeling of connection is so important. It reminds us that we all go through these ups and downs together.
Speaking of ups and downs, I keep thinking about that phrase, or something else, how it can be good or bad depending on how you say it.
It shows how important your tone of voice and body language are. Sometimes it's not what you say, but how you say it that matters.
It's like we have to crack a secret code.
And the more you learn English, the better you'll get at understanding those little cues. Like if someone being serious, sarcastic, playful.
It's like being a detective.
That's one of the best things about learning a new language. It's a journey. It's not just about grammar. It's about understanding people.
So to wrap up this deep dive into negative emotions, here's a question for our listeners.
What are some of the ways you express those feelings in your own native language? Are there any words or phrases that English doesn't have?
It's interesting how different languages have different ways to describe the same thing. Sometimes there's a direct translation, but sometimes the real meaning is about the culture and history behind the words.
Language isn't just about sharing information. It's about sharing how you feel. And when you learn about those differences, you understand more about the world.
So as you keep learning English, don't just look up words in the dictionary. Think about the culture, the emotions, how people use language in real life.
Language is constantly changing. It's about how we connect and inspire each other. The more you learn, the more you'll discover.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of negative emotions in English.
Keep learning and exploring, and don't be afraid of those difficult emotions. They're a part of what makes us human.